What is up, everybody? It's me, Joe, and I'm back with another reaction. And we're back with Anarchy History. And we're back with the tanks we're doing the Tiger one. So yeah, everyone saw a couple weeks ago that I basically came up and... Hi, Nate. There's everybody. Sorry it took so long. I just was getting some stuff set up that I forgot. slip of the brain. But anyway, so everyone saw last week I put up a poll to figure out which Anarchy history video I would do next. It was a tie between... It was in my head between the Tiger one and the German fighter race Marseille. So I had to put it up there. So I threw it up to you guys, and you guys overwhelmingly said the Tiger won. So we're going to do that. But before we watch this video, make sure you like and subscribe, turn on notifications, follow me on all my social media down below in the description. And if you want to support this channel and keep giving that adorable puppy dog over there cookies, be sure to go down below and join my YouTube membership. Now... Okay, we've ripped into the turret pits and multiple other things. German rise. Let's see what and plus Pig also. A while ago we ran into Pig and he also talked about the Tiger one. Be nice to my favorite heavy tank, please. Let's get this video started in 3, 2, 1, and play. Oh boy.
If you talk tanks in World War II, which, to be honest, is a common thing on this platform, there are a few that get all of the attention.
Mm-hmm.
And of those few, there is one that stands clearly above the others in both adoration and infamy. The Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger.
As usual, do you not
now, I know
me,
I've been
Nathan?
doing history about Azure Lane's ship foos on this channel. But as we all know, there is one other big military history with waifus franchise out there.
Yeah, Girls on Panzer, one of my favorites.
After all, my very first successful video on this channel was made using Girls on Panzer as a base, and despite how much love and attention I put into our wonderful boat waifus, I have far more experience with aviation and armor than I do with boats. Don't worry, though. Enterprise's script is coming along rather nicely, and... at this time of recording, we have finally worked out issues with Akagi's video, and that will be
we'll get to Akagi eventually.
Promoted. So, that's all good. But in the meantime, I'm going to do something really fun by simultaneously pandering to and pissing off wearaboos.
Oh no.
And if this video sucks, I'm going to have to answer to Maho, and let's be real, no one who values their lives wants to answer to Maho.
No, don't answer to Maho.
But guess what? This documentary is actually a 2-for-1 documentary because we're also going to be doing the Tiger and, at the same time, a brief history of the Wehrmacht. So get ready, because it's history lesson time.
Here we go. Okay, now focus. There it goes. Really? Punk rock for the Wehrmacht. Well, this video's demonetized. Please join my YouTube membership so I can avoid all this shit.
Now, forgive me for being presumptuous, but I'm going to assume that you guys...
Ladies and gentlemen, real quick, present the salute to the ugly paper hanger. There we go. What, you thought I was going to do that? Fuck no. These guys are assholes, especially that guy. Fuck him.
Background of Germany in the 1930s, or at least the basics of it. But for those of you who don't, let me sum it up for you. Germany broke, Germany woke, Germany based, Germany bigger, the Austrians acquiesce, the Brits back off, and the Czechs check out. With us so far? Okay, good. Now we're on the same page, let's talk about everyone's favourite thing. Doctrine.
Yay!
By this time,
Doctrine.
It was pretty obvious to everyone who wasn't intellectually comatose or in blatant denial that war was on the horizon. But like pretty much all long-standing institutions, militaries tend to default to, or worse, depend on, prior information and experience when formulating plans for the future. However, the Reichswehr, now the Wehrmacht, had undergone drastic changes since their defeat during the First World War. The Allied offensives during that war at Cambrai, followed later by the 100 Days Offensive at Amiens and the Hindenburg Line, had demonstrated the power of combined arms warfare, namely the integration of artillery, infantry, tanks, and air power into a single cohesive fighting force, which defeats the enemy in an open battle, breaking their lines and ultimately forcing a rout.
Right.
This was essentially the ultimate evolution of what's known as the set-piece battle. However, to the Germans, or let's be honest here, the Prussians, these developments meant something very different. During the late 1920s and the early 1930s, the British Army had experimented with armoured warfare, with the creatively titled Experimental Mechanized Force. They had tried using tanks and infantry in a single mobile unit, combined with strong air and artillery support. But due to the doctrinal failings in the British Army at the time, as well as tanks...
Okay, I need to point out something. Look at this! He just dug out all the pillows and made a... Koa, you are a ham. Who's a good boy? What? My dog. He's a knucklehead. Fucking A.
Designed for either infantry support, such as the Matilda series of tanks, or tanks that amounted to glorified tracked scout cars, they had fallen flat on their asses. And until the development of the Cruiser series of tanks, Crusader and the Cromwell,
I think we're talking about the Tiger
British
one.
armoured forces had neither the doctrine nor the equipment to engage in armoured warfare with any serious success.
Right.
But during these exercises, like all major military exercises, there were foreign attachés present.
Oh, yeah.
And there was one group in particular paying very close attention.
The Germans?
Yeah, I think you can all see where this one's going. Prussia, later Germany, had always drawn the short straw when it came to geopolitics in Europe. Every political or military conflict Germany ended up in, due to its location in the very centre of the continent, inevitably results in a war on multiple fronts, or worse, a war on every front. Not only that, Germany, despite having a very powerful industry when compared to the rest of Europe, does not have much in the way of natural resources beyond the basic stuff.
That is true.
Meaning, in the modern, rapidly globalizing world of the 19th and 20th centuries, they had to import what they need to wage war, namely coal, oil, iron, and rare metals. Which, when going back to the war on all fronts things, is, as they say, suboptimal.
Yeah.
The way the German military and political thinkers at the time dealt with this is, in a piece of dark irony, rather similar to how contemporary Israel deals with it. The old saying goes that states have an army while Prussia's army has a state.
Yes.
And it achieves its aims one of two ways. Either A, setting the surrounding nations and allies on each other while you sit in the middle riding out the storm, and occasionally profiting from both sides, otherwise known as the Bismarck strategy.
Hey!
Or you wage rapid wars of aggression, preemptively and ferociously demolishing your enemies in short, efficient campaigns, waged over short to moderate distances. Frederick the Great, Clausewitz, and Moltke all followed the same mantra.
They did.
Known as the Prussian style.
They were.
And while the government, politics, and material conditions of Germany had changed, due to the somewhat fixed nature of geopolitics, that being the geo part, it's really hard to move countries, the overall strategic position of Germany hadn't changed.
Yeah.
The Germans, therefore, specialized in what's known to them as Bewegungskrieg, or maneuver warfare, a doctrine calling for well-trained, organized, and fast-moving troops to break through the enemy's weak points and cause havoc in their rear. They had done it all throughout their modern history, notably during the Franco-Prussian War, and to a not-so-successful degree, World War I. And it was the latter conflict that had Germany's modern military theorists thinking. Their stormtroopers had been very effective during the Kaiserschlacht offensive, and their Prussian maneuver warfare had slaughtered the Russians on the Eastern Front, most famously at Tannenberg.
Yeah.
Modern armies had lines and fronts crossing entire continents now, hence wars had become more static. Furthermore, the advent of high-powered artillery, aircraft, and most of all the machine gun had made offensive operations far more costly to carry out.
Oh, yeah.
One man with the right weapon can now wipe out entire companies of men. However, it also takes a lot more men and equipment to man an entire border, not to mention the industry and money to keep the war going, and of course, the longer a war goes on, the more fornicated Germany is.
Yes, indeed.
So, what's the solution? The Germans resolved this problem by taking Clausewitz's concept of the Schwerpunkt, that being the main concentrated assault with all your forces, and quadrupled down on it to create Schwerpunkt Reloaded, otherwise known as Blitzkrieg.
There we go.
In simplest terms, small units of men, stormtroopers and later paratroopers in the German case, along with extensive recon forces, probe and analyze the enemy's defensive arrangements. Once these operations identify weak points in the enemy's line, all available forces are massed behind them. Once assembled, an all-out assault is launched at the various weak points identified, depending on how many men you have. Usually around 2 or 3 main offensives, with smaller ones at the tactical level.
Right.
These massed forces come with everything: artillery, infantry, air power, and mechanized forces with tank support. The idea being that with this force blowing a huge hole in the enemy line, the faster and more mobile mechanized and cavalry forces can roll as fast as they can to strategic objectives in the rear.
Yes.
Headquarters, rail hubs, factories for natural resources.
And to their credit, it did work.
This
for a
rapid
while.
offensive has the goal of paralyzing the enemy's decision-making abilities, keeping them off balance and forcing them to react to you rather than letting them dictate the flow of battle, firmly retaining the initiative for you. Once the first phase is complete, you then attempt concentric advances. If multiple spearheads break through, their immediate goal is to link up behind enemy lines, cutting off the enemy's frontline defenses, which of course results in a Kesselschlacht, or a cauldron battle, a battle of encirclement in other words, where your main force of infantry mops up the defenders while the mobile forces cut off their escape. Using this method, if the enemy is spread out defending a frontier or border or maintaining a defensive line, and you seize the initiative, or even better, you start the war with the first move, a smaller force can defeat a larger one through encirclement, very similar to Hannibal at the Battle of Cannae.
Right.
The German army in 1914 actually attempted this with the Schlieffen Plan. However, due to the aforementioned advances in technology as well as the distances they needed to cover with only horses and on foot, the Allies managed to stop them cold, forcing Germany into a war of attrition, which is of course a war the Germans couldn't win, resulting in the aforementioned 100 Days Offensive and breaking of the Hindenburg Line, etc.
Yeah.
The younger German military thinkers who had fought in that campaign, at the company or junior staff level, men like Erwin Rommel, Heinz Guderian, and Erich von Manstein, had studied these campaigns in retrospect, putting their field and operational experiences to work. Moreover, they had been watching the experiments of French, British, and especially Soviet developments in armored doctrine. And they had noticed something.
Oh, God!
All the other nations were practicing combined arms warfare, yes, but the arms themselves were divided into each formation. The infantry regiment was under the infantry commander, the artillery was under the artillery commander, the air force under the air commander, etc., etc. While there were numerous strategic and political considerations, at an operational and tactical level, one thing had stopped the Germans from achieving victory in the offensive of 1914. Speed.
Yes.
Or rather, the lack thereof.
Yeah, they were
Communications
stuck
were
in
too
the
slow.
mud.
Orders had to be constantly updated. The enemy's defensive capabilities were greatly expanded by the advance in technology and their professional armies, delaying their advance. And most critical of all, their armies had to either ride horses or march into battle, while the enemy had interior lines of reinforcement and communication via road and rail.
Mm-hmm.
The result being German troops and animals would wind up exhausted, all the while being too slow to outrun the defenders, meaning they had to attack with, well, as we say, suboptimal results. After considering these problems, German advocates for armoured warfare put forward 2 revolutionary ideas. First, they advocated the creation of the Panzer Division, a singular formation unifying all the necessary components for combined armed warfare into a single package. Recon, artillery, tanks, infantry, engineers, the whole shebang. These independent formations would also have one other key component. All of the units in Panzer divisions, down to the individual tanks, vehicles, and even infantry platoon commanders, all of them would have radios to talk to each other. And later on, radios to talk directly to the Luftwaffe.
Oh, yeah. That was
The
really
other major change was more of a cultural shift in leadership practices. While independent thinking at the tactical level was far more progressive in the Prussian military than most other European states at the time, the aristocratic hierarchies and traditional military mindset was still very much present in the German officer corps throughout World War I and the interwar period.
Yeah, big time.
Combine that with the less developed communication systems, and you have an army that follows doctrine or the original plan without consideration for the changing circumstances of the battle. Granted, they had generally more flexibility up front than the other armies of the time, but it could always be better. The German officer corps, from their experience in World War I, had taken Clausewitz's and Moltke's analysis of war, famously encapsulated in the phrase, "No plan survives first contact with the enemy,"
Oh, yeah.
and they had come up the ranks pushing for change. When they did finally achieve that change, they adopted mission command, or Auftragstaktik, and that has since been adopted by pretty much every modern military in one form or another, especially in the United States.
Oh, yeah, we use it quite often.
In its most basic explanation, the main strategic concept, for example, defeating France, is disseminated down the chain of command as a series of tasks based on rank and responsibility. You give the men under your command their objective, and they then determine the best way of accomplishing that objective. The reason being is that they are actually fighting the battle, and therefore have a better grasp of the situation on the ground. If they see an opportunity or have a better plan than you, because they have more up-to-date information, they don't have to sit on their asses waiting for you to tell them if they can do it or not. As long as it achieves the original objective, or maybe even achieves more than the original objective, the method is not important.
Mm-hmm.
And in the German way of war, this could go so far as disobeying direct orders, because as the commander on the ground, you saw an opportunity too good to ignore. Erwin Rommel would be famous for this,
yes,
but he was by no means an exception.
Mm-mm.
German soldiers of all ranks in the earlier years of World War II would often disobey or reinterpret orders due to the ever-changing situation at the front. This would change as the situation deteriorated and fascist doctrine of total control and fight to the last man took over. But even then, it still remained engraved in the Wehrmacht and to a lesser extent the Waffen-SS to adapt and be flexible, which ultimately is why the Germans did so well despite their hopeless situation. So, let's summarize. We have self-contained divisions that can operate independently.
Mm-hmm.
This is good because the Germans don't have a lot of trucks or tanks to begin with. All that they do have can be concentrated into one location and be relatively self-sufficient. And the men in command of those divisions have almost complete freedom to act on their own should a golden opportunity present itself. And these are factored into a doctrine which prioritizes breaking enemy lines and then essentially rushing to your objectives come hell or high water, encircling the enemy in the process. What you get from all this, and forgive me for sounding like a Varibu, was simply the most effective military machine in the world at the time.
At the time, yes.
But of course, it's not all sunshine and rainbows.
No.
Like with all strategies, there are a few drawbacks. First is the fact, for this to work, you need the terrain to be cooperative. You need plenty of good roads and plenty of fields so you can maintain speed, as well as a distinct lack of choke points, i.e. rivers, marshes, or dense forests.
Yeah, and in Russia,
Furthermore,
like
the distance you need to cover can't be too large. And you also need control of the air. Half of this doctrine derives its strength from surprise and hitting weak points. If the enemy can recon your position while denying your recon, or even worse, interdict your advance with strike aircraft, they can stop you from moving, which is kind of important in maneuver warfare.
Mm-hmm.
But above all, the biggest issue with this type of warfare is logistics.
Oh, God, yes.
When your forces are moving hell for leather forward through enemy positions, bypassing strong points and so forth,
yay, the U.S.
their
Army.
flanks will be weak and prone to counterattack. And until the infantry widen the advance behind them, this means your lines of supply are in danger.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not even addressing the fact that your resupply is now miles behind you and getting further away the longer you advance, making your situation increasingly tenuous the further you go. The Germans tried to compensate for this by making the bulk of their mobile divisions support and logistics units, while a small, highly trained and well-equipped combat cadre at the front does double its share of the fighting. But one can imagine that logistics for this kind of warfare is a major pain in the ass. However, I'm going to save the logistical implications of all of this until later, because A, it's contextual, and B, it's such a clusterfuck it's going to need its own section.
Fair enough.
But okay. I've given you guys all of this information without saying a single word about the Tiger or indeed any German tanks.
Come on, let's get on with it.
Why is that? This is a video about the Tiger, after all.
Uh-huh.
Well, the reason is I need you guys to understand the context as to exactly why the Tiger was so special and unique. And you also need to know the mindset of those who made her. Because by all accounts, the Tiger went against almost every ounce of what I've said above. And yet it makes perfect sense as to why. Because guess what, guys? It's that time. September 1st, 1939.
Let's get ready to run.
Oh, no.
They are the Panzer elite.
Okay, yep.
Never too early for gratuitous sabotage.
Never.
Anyway.
Never too early.
During the annexation of Austria, the Germans had refined the optimum balance of support vehicles to panzers after hard-won field experience. Long story short, half their tanks broke down during the annexation. This, of course, was further reinforced by their occupation of Czechia. Here is the divisional template again of the 1939 Panzer Division, just to refresh your memories. As you can see, the tanks only make up one line of the table of organization. The rest are all support elements and infantry. And during their conquest of Poland, they did some serious damage. However, the invasion of Poland wasn't so much a demonstration of Blitzkrieg in any real sense, other than it was an overwhelming smackdown, achieved with air supremacy and a vastly superior amount of combat power.
Oh, yeah. Poland
and
was
after
not
winning that
prepared.
campaign with the help of some sketchy and totally legit diplomacy,
Fuck you,
they prepared to embark on an
Molotov!
offensive in the west. Originally, they were going to go with a similar plan to their original attempt at conquering France, presenting the Schlieffen Plan, now with the added benefit of the internal combustion engine. But due to a pilot getting lost and crashing in Belgium with a full set of the plans, the Allies now know everything. Not that it took a genius, because they had guessed as much, considering that the alternative is to go straight through the Maginot Line, and in the immortal words of someone with a very similar name to Maginot...
Fuck no.
Hey, Magnus! Haven't seen you in a hot minute!
But while all this was happening, and without the Panzer's involvement to any significant degree, Germany secured its iron ore trade with Sweden by occupying Norway and Denmark, which went well, for the most part.
Alarm!
Honestly, at this point, I just pity the Kriegsmarine. But yes, the plans had been compromised, so they needed a new plan. And it's here that we see Erich von Manstein come into the picture. And he says, hey boys, here's the thing. The Allies think we're going to go Schlieffening. What if we only do a half Schlieffen? The Allies will rush forward to meet us in the Netherlands. When they do, we attack through the Ardennes forest, which the Allies, and until recently all of us, thought was impossible to do with tanks. Now, the German High Command quite rightly said that this was an absolutely apocalyptically stupid idea that goes against all military logic. There are barely any roads, impassable terrain, and if the Allies find out their artillery and air power can destroy our entire armoured force while they're trapped on these aforementioned narrow roads. However, Manstein countered that it's precisely because this plan is so mind-bogglingly stupid that it will work, because no one would be absolutely moronic enough to try it. We would catch them completely by surprise and drive to the English Channel behind them, cutting off the elite British and French forces, leaving only their reserves and secondary divisions trapped behind our main lines, unable to save their friends.
Mm-hmm.
This plan was named the Sickle Cut, and after showing it to the world's most successful art school dropout since Vincent van Gogh, who in character loved the idea, the plan was adopted, and at the head of the sickle itself were Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel. Now, at this time, most of the available German tanks were a collection of older models or training vehicles. The Panzer I was a lightly armoured vehicle armed with only machine guns, while the Panzer II was a slightly heavier and more heavily armed tank with a 20mm autocannon.
Decent for
Both
infantry
of these tank
support.
designs were inferior to most of the vehicles operated by the British and French. But
Yeah.
luckily, there were 3 new types available in limited quantity which could make up for these shortcomings. First was what was intended to be the main battle tank of the Wehrmacht, the Panzer III.
Mm-hmm.
With decent armor and a 37mm KWK 36 main gun.
Highly underrated tank.
This vehicle was one of the best designs in the world at the time, and had great capability. But it would be overshadowed by what became the main battle tank of the Wehrmacht. The Panzer IV started life as an infantry support tank, intended to fulfill the role that would eventually, and rather ironically, given that it used the Panzer III chassis, became the Stug 3's job.
Yep.
The Panzer IV had a 75mm KWK 37 howitzer as its main gun, with a large supply of HE rounds. However, given the size and power of the gun, it was still useful against vehicles except for the heaviest enemy tanks. And finally, we have, actually, you know what? I think I'm just going to bring in the floof for this one.
Of course. Of course, bring in Yukari.
God, she's great.
She is.
But she didn't mention
she
the
is
gun.
every tank nerd's
The
spirit
gun
animal.
on the Panzer 38T was a 37mm Czech anti-tank gun.
Oh yeah.
Now,
Good old
the more
38T.
observant among you may have noticed what I'm going to say already. If you look at all these tanks, what do they have in common? They're all medium tanks. Now, granted, the Panzer I and II are light tanks technically, but by the standards at the time, they were still relatively punchy. And they
Fair.
were known to be merely a development phase rather than actual combat vehicles.
Okay, fair enough.
The
fair enough.
38T, the 3, and the 4, meanwhile, all had decent armor for the time, decent guns, but most of all, they were all fast.
Oh yeah.
Ideal for maneuvering around the enemy and wiping out rear echelon units, or if push came to shove, shooting into the weaker side and rear armor of the heavier tanks. You can see what I'm getting at, can't you? German tank design was consciously heading into what would eventually become the main battle tank concept.
Yep.
A focus on balancing firepower, armor, and mobility, with a particular emphasis on the mobility component. In fact, all German armoured vehicles had this focus, from the half-tracks to the scout cars. We need to move fast, and we need to move now. And
Get in there,
that is
do the
exactly
job, get
what
fucking
they did.
moving.
On the 10th of May, Case Yellow began. German troops began advancing into the Low Countries rapidly, while paratroopers seized key bridges and forts along the main invasion routes. The Luftwaffe achieved air supremacy in a matter of hours, wiping out the Dutch and Belgian air forces on the ground along with a decent chunk of the RAF and the Armée de l'Air. The Allies immediately sprung into action at this eventuality, advancing all of their forces onto the various river fronts in Belgium and Holland, eagerly awaiting the German advance. And they were rewarded with exactly that. A German armoured vanguard, supported by heavy air assets, was rolling through Holland and Belgium. Although it was weird because the Allies could have sworn the Germans had more tanks than this. And
That's
of course
all
they
their
did.
tanks.
Later on during the
Oh,
campaign,
shit.
Allied pilots reported large columns of German armour heading through the Ardennes forest. But these reports were dismissed because such terrain was impassable to tanks. And that's true. If you're using big heavy infantry support tanks like the Matildas or the Char 1Bs. But what if you had engineers with you? And what if you had lighter vehicles?
Mm-hmm.
And what if all your support elements had come with you as well? The Germans broke through the light Allied defences in the Ardennes and started heading for the English Channel. By day 3 they had reached the River Meuse, the major river between them and the open plains of northern France. After a daring combined assault with Stuka strikes and tank guns pinning the French defenders, while infantry stormed across in assault boats under the cover of a smokescreen, Rommel's 7th Panzer Division made it across the river. In fact, Rommel himself could be seen firing a light machine gun at a French counterattack while directing the operation personally, and once the crossing was made, he could be seen helping engineers lash the pontoon bridge together to allow the tanks to cross. Once Rommel got his tanks across the river, and against orders, he assembled his entire division and charged after the retreating French.
And he just kept
Doing
going.
so, he essentially shattered the entire French Second Army Corps, taking 10,000 prisoners for the loss of only 36 men. He had moved so fast that
Don't
neither
worry,
the
it'll
Allies or the
come.
German High Command, for that matter, knew where he was. the 7th Panzer Division just seemingly appeared at will, demolishing all in its path. For this, they earned a nickname. Ghost Division. But in doing their mad dash forward, they had left their flanks exposed. The infantry just simply couldn't catch them. The Allies were in disarray. They were almost totally beaten. But they still had a large number of reserve divisions. They, unlike the Germans, had lots of vehicles. But their tanks were heavier and slower to move. Thus, they hadn't even been moved up with the other formations during their rush through the Low Countries. Recognizing how overextended the Germans were, they planned to cut off Rommel and Guderian, thus rescuing the BEF and the only professional French troops by taking Arras. And it is here, finally, after all of that build-up, where the story of Nazi Germany's most infamous tank begins. You see, when the Allies attacked, they attacked with Matildas, Soma 35s, and Charles 1Bs.
All very decent tanks.
The Germans, realizing
very
the
good tanks,
tenuous
very
nature of
heavily
their
armed
advance,
tanks.
dug in at the spearhead while wheeling their mobile
Armed and
forces
armored,
around
I should
to
say.
meet the attack. The Panzer IIIs and IVs, along with the infantry's anti-tank guns, engaged the Allied armoured formations and noted, to their horror, that their rounds just bounced harmlessly off them.
Oh, yeah.
Again and
armor was
again, their
tough.
37mm rounds smacked dead on to the Allied tanks. And every time, they were either stopped dead or just ricocheted off. The SS Totenkopf Division, the mightiest and proudest of the Aryan race, ran like the little small dick bitches they were as they smashed through their lines.
To quote a fellow small dick who went up against a real fucking vampire, pardon me, Frau, but you're a few dozen millimeters too short to pierce that armor.
It was only the professionalism of the Panzer troops and the innovative thinking of their commander that prevented disaster. The Schutzen regiments attached to 7th Panzer had been ordered to keep their 88mm anti-aircraft guns close to the front, both to dissuade Allied aircraft as well as to serve in the heavy anti-tank role.
Mm-hmm.
Rommel had been toying with the idea of integrating anti-tank weapons into his mobile units, something which he would become famous for later.
Mm-hmm.
And as the British tanks advanced, the 88s tore them to shreds.
Oh, yeah. Fucking
Meanwhile, the
88,
French
one of the best guns ever built, in my
advanced,
opinion.
They got lost during the night and attacked the British instead, killing
You
the British AT
fools!
crew for the loss of a couple of Soma 35s. The French army.
Well, the 88, they're talking 88 millimeters. So, yeah, sorry. And plus, we use 75 millimeters and 105 millimeters. So, really, it's only the Navy that uses inches. The Army still uses the metric system. And the Air Force, when I think about it.
Eventually, though, they did find the Germans, but by that time the battle was over and a bit past their involvement.
Yeah.
The Germans, victorious, prepared to resume their drive, but then, in one of the most controversial decisions in military history, they were told to hold their position. The Panzer leaders were rightly furious and protested, but the attack on their flanks had given the more traditionalist officers, as well as the mustachioed madman, a panic attack. This would contribute, of course, to the British successfully retreating from Dunkirk, and Guderian's doctor running out of blood pressure medication.
Oh, poor Guderian.
But ultimately, it wouldn't really matter in the short term. Following the British retreat, the French army disintegrated, and after more Ghost Division shenanigans, Rommel reached the Channel and then cruised along down it. With an outstanding, astonishing advance to Cherbourg from Rouen, he made 150 miles in 24 hours. The French, completely defeated, surrendered on June 22nd, 1940, ending what is probably the most successful campaign in modern military history. But the Panzerwaffe, despite winning the most hotly contested Tour de France in years, had nevertheless been given a wake-up call. Both their ultimate triumph and their tactical successes had been achieved through superior doctrine and training, with a little bit of luck and a lot of air support.
Oh, yeah.
Not to mention superior morale.
Okay, yes, let's also talk about this real quick. Yes, I know the jokes about the French and their white flags. I get it. It's always fun to mock the French. But it wasn't French cowardice. It wasn't any of that. What defeated France was simply superior tanks, doctrine, and commanders at the time. The French army, and to a lesser extent the British, were vastly underprepared strategically to counter the German army. So, yeah. So, let's cut the French a bit of a break. They lost because they went up against a superior opponent with superior tactics. That's what won the Battle of France, in the case for the Germans.
Their tanks had been inferior to the Allied designs. If a proper head-to-head confrontation of armor were to happen, unless their gear got an upgrade, they'd be up shit creek. Thankfully, there's not much likelihood of that. After all, we've defeated the French. The British have to give up now. That said, for some reason, even though it's the day of our glorious victory, the date June 22nd gives me a strange feeling of foreboding and dread. It's probably nothing.
Really? Oh yeah.
So the British didn't give up. Shocker.
Yeah, Britain's
apparently having the world's
like
largest navy and the world's first integrated air defense network makes you very hard to invade.
Yeah.
It also helps when the head of the Luftwaffe is a moronic disgrace to humanity.
Ladies and gentlemen, present the middle finger salute to the blubbering walrus! Yes! Present the middle finger salute to the blubbering walrus. 'Cause fuck his ass. I will still say it. I've said it before. I will say it again. How the fuck was this lard ass a fucking fighter pilot? Look at him! God almighty! The whole motor pool was needed to forklift his ass into an airplane. It probably was custom built for his ass. God, fuck, what a fucking fat load of shit.
Humanity who's more interested
you,
in plundering the
Fatso
finest
Goring.
example of a civilized culture, which he would never be worthy of in a millennium, instead of leading and trusting his highly trained and competent subordinates. Anyway, thanks to the aforementioned incompetent, useless idiot, Britain is still in the fight, meaning Germany has no access to international trade.
Nope.
And an enemy who, given time, will be able to outproduce and overpower them with all the resources
there's
and
the
manpower of the
Churchill.
British Empire. It was a simple equation. The British, with their empire, as well as good relations with the United States, let alone the Americans actually joining the conflict, had a theoretical combat power unattainable by the Wehrmacht. Even if Germany sat still and the Americans stayed out of the
You're
war,
good.
defeat was inevitable. The clock was ticking.
Yep.
They only had one option other than surrender. Seize the resources and slave labor required to operate without the constraints of international shipping lanes, which meant one thing: conquering the Soviet Union.
And this is where everything goes to shit.
While preparations for Operation Barbarossa were underway, Germany was forced to
Good.
rescue their useless allies. The Italians had invaded half the Mediterranean, only for the Mediterranean's occupants to promptly throw them back out. Unlike last time, where the disciplined juggernaut of the legions brought civilization,
I think someone told him and made him look slimmer. Apparently that guy was lying.
this time we had an army which resupplied its troops with 20,000 pairs of boots.
Maybe maybe Goring wore white because they thought it would make him an easier target. You could send a sniper a mile away and you could still hit the guy. Probably the white was just to help with their accuracy.
Boots, all of them left-footed. Yes, that is a true story. As such, German forces occupied the Balkans and Greece, while dispatching Rommel with a small mobile force that would later become known as the Afrika Korps. And again, while succeeding in all of these ventures, the victories were won through air power and superior tactics.
Yes.
Their tanks, while more up-to-date when compared to their 1940s designs, were still inferior to that of the British heavy tanks.
Mm-hmm.
The Panzerwaffe lobbied the Waffenamt, the German Arms Appropriations Committee, for new tanks to combat the British designs. Tanks with better armour, decent mobility, but above all, better guns. And so, on the 26th of May 1941, a request was put to the two heavy hitters in German heavy vehicle design. Both Porsche and Henschel were told to submit prototypes for a 45-ton heavy tank capable of mounting the 88mm KWK-36 anti-tank gun. The vehicle was intended to be used in breakthrough operations and have the ability to counter British heavy infantry support tanks. Both companies had been working on heavy tank designs in anticipation of this request after the feedback received from the Panzer crews post-Blitzkrieg, and so development time was curtailed significantly. With that in mind, the due date was set for June
God,
of
I wish I had
1942.
that in Hearts of Iron.
By that time, Germany should have the resources of the conquered USSR to work with, allowing for mass production of the new vehicle to stand off against the inevitable British invasion. And speaking of invasions, boys and girls, it's time for the main event. On June 22nd, 1941, 1 year exactly after the French surrender, German troops embarked on the largest campaign in military history. The single largest war of all time, so far at least, was now underway. And it was a total rout. Stalin, in his infinite wisdom, had...
look, everybody. It's everyone's honest... Okay, let's talk about Stalin. I mean, look at this son of this absolute sociopathic madman mass murderer. Honestly, this war was literally the fight of who. Ugh. God, two evil dictators. Jesus Christ. Fucking A.
Had been exporting all sorts of raw material to the Nazis over the past half a decade, and had killed all of his senior officers, fearing a coup that wasn't even real.
Yep.
And then, after launching a poorly planned Pyrrhic war in Finland, decided to mass his troops on the German border with the full intent of invading at the opportune moment, once his army had been rebuilt in a year or two. However, if you cast your mind back to the German way of war, that being exploitation of weak points in line, followed by rapid encirclement, what would be the worst tactic? Could it possibly be bunching up all of your units at the front line while your rear areas are all completely unguarded and filled with logistics and admin units? War games conducted by Zhukov established that if the Soviets attacked first, their dispositions were at extreme risk of being encircled by German forces.
Oh, yeah.
Zhukov therefore recommended that the original fortified border pre-annexation of Poland, dubbed the Stalin Line, should be maintained while the NKVD border divisions and militia forces slow down the initial German advance. However, Stalin decided that the Germans wouldn't invade because Britain was still in the fight, and so the border should be fortified while they prepared to attack the Germans in 1943 or 1944. The result was a slaughter.
Yep.
With hundreds of thousands killed or captured within the first month. This was a cakewalk. The Germans were certain they'd be in Moscow by August. With encirclement after encirclement, the Red Army began to disintegrate. Or so it would seem, at any rate. If nothing else, one thing you can be sure of. Nobody can stop the mighty war machine of the Aryan master...
Oh, no.
Hey.
I smell JoJo!
What the fuck are those?
Oh, fuck! It's the T-34s!
The guns! The guns, they
Shit,
can
they're all over the place! Oh, sweet Jesus. You're a piece of shit, but there's so many of you.
Holy shit.
Oh boy.
The Soviets had tanks which absolutely no one expected. The T-34s and the KVs caused, in the
Especially
words
the
of
KVs.
Henschel's chief designer, extreme consternation as they were superior to any tanks currently available to the German
Don't you
army.
mean heart palpitations?
Thus, the timetable needed to be accelerated. While the Panzer IIIs and Panzer IVs were outgunned, the
Again, we already discussed the T-34 with Pig, that the T-34 is a total piece of shit. But when you have 400,000 pieces of shit up against your 100, as well as a lot of other Lend-Lease American tanks mixed in with those 40,000 pieces of shit that actually are good and good shit. As well as basically our whole fighting of sending resources of Lend-Lease and supplies to both England and Russia. Wow. But even so, yeah. The T-34. A piece of shit tank, but when you get 40,000 pieces of shit together, you've got a wall of shit that just threatens to typhoon over everybody.
due date for the new heavy tanks was set for the 20th of April 1942. Hitler's birthday.
Of course.
And the winner would be shifted into immediate serial production once the basic bugs were worked out. And they would definitely be needed, seeing as the Wehrmacht was now in the process of freezing to death, with no hope of victory in the East that year. Fun fact, the Germans did have winter clothing and winter equipment for their soldiers, but the logistics system in Russia was so bad, to ship it to the front they would have to take away from the ammunition and fuel shipments, which was the only thing keeping their frontline combat capable and alive. There was also the other darker part of that situation, which was the German General Staff had ruled against supplying the troops with winter clothing during the initial invasion.
In winter, never invade Russia. Miami maybe, but never Russia.
Which for morale purposes, as well as political reasons, was deemed unacceptable. The great thing about fascist militarists is that the only thing they care more about than victory is their ego.
Yeah.
Whether it be Japan, Italy, or the Nazis, they all make this mistake.
Exploit the ego of these morons.
Even Stalin got over himself. Eventually.
I don't think he ever got over it. They just said, hey boss, take a seat. We got this. Your blood pressure's too high. Just do whatever he didn't do.
And speaking of egos, let's check in on our boy Porsche, because it's finally time to talk nitty-gritty technical details.
Okay!
Porsche.
Just so everyone knows, the Tiger Porsche is my favorite heavy tank. Please be merciful. Please be merciful on my baby.
Porsche, in his typical style, had been working on the potential prototypes for a heavy tank as early as 1939, having designed a heavier version of a medium tank proposal requested by the Waffenamt, designated VK30.01. German geniuses like Porsche and Messerschmitt are tinkerers who have been given an unlimited budget.
Yeah.
They always have 50 projects going at once, which made Erhard Misch and Albert Speer have a stroke a bit later. But things were going relatively well at this point, besides the whole Russian winter without a jacket thing, so no one actually cares right now. However, this time round it was actually a bit easier, as Krupp had already designed a turret to fit the 88mm gun, so all they really needed to do was have a tank to attach it to. But Porsche, during the middle of this cataclysmic global conflict, ceasing all international trade, wanted to go all in. He wanted to go the full Lamborghini 2 decades before Lamborghini would even exist. He wanted compressed air-assisted braking. He wanted a forward-mounted turret to allow for not one, but 2 engines. 2 V10s operated through a linked throttle. But this was small time. No. He didn't want these just to power the vehicle. No. He wanted to take the state-of-the-art electric motor technology fitted to Germany's U-boats. You know, the tech that takes up the entire aft section of a fleet-class submarine, requiring a small team of engineers to run and maintain. He wanted to miniaturize that technology with an experimental design, and then use those electric motors to power the tracks via the power generated via the gasoline or diesel engines. Power which had to go through a massive fuck-off generator before it even got to the electric motors. So, think about this. Gasoline-electric transmission, which is basically two engines powering a generator which then powers two electric engines. There were advantages to this, of course. The gearbox and transmission would be replaced in this setup by a 3-stage speed switch, powering the drive wheels at the rear of the tank, meaning the vehicle would be easy to drive and have a higher top speed, as seen here in this colorized documentary footage.
Hell yeah!
But of course, spoiler alert, we know that this design wasn't adopted, so there is an incoming but.
Oh,
And,
be nice, please.
Well,
The Porsche Tiger. People really into tanks love this one.
Oh, no.
But it digs into the earth really easily. And it overheats. And catches fire. It's known for breaking easily. Oh man, we did it again! Hey Hoshino, put it out!
funny thing about using experimental technology in what's supposed to be a serial production tank within months of adoption, not to mention technology that uses a lot of copper, which is a rare metal, the thing we're fighting this whole war to get. It's expensive to make, expensive to run, requires a ton of maintenance to both work and keep working, and if that wasn't enough, has a tendency to just break or catch fire, rendering that highly technical, classified, super expensive weapon system a rather imposing lawn ornament. A cool lawn ornament, to be sure, but when there are shells and machine gun bullets directed at you, evacuating it would not be fun. And given that vehicle fires require evacuation, they are something you want to be a purely enemy-inflicted hazard rather than an occupational one. Other than that, there is nothing really more notable about this prototype other than the distinctive wheel configuration.
Yes.
Most advanced German armour would have interleaved road wheels, with some of them being powered to propel the vehicle, while this one maintained individual wheels in sets of two, along with the torsion bar suspension and drive sprockets.
Which I think is
Which
superior.
I guess is a plus, considering that it would be easy to change the tracks on this model.
Yeah, real quick. First things first. Oh, yeah, I know. Okay, yes, I know. The Tiger P's engine system was absolutely atrocious, as my freak out on the T-14 is evident, because I know the engines that powered this thing were abysmally underpowered and abysmally overcomplicated. I absolutely agree. But again, there are some advantages to the gas electric engine mashup. It's actually very good. It does away with a whole lot with the gearbox, with a complicated gearbox. It does away with a whole lot of nonsense. I just think that maybe this was too far apart. Maybe I think Porsche should have stuck to two full power diesel engines and just did the fucking gas or diesel engines themselves. That would have made things a whole lot better. But then again, also the speed was also a thing that was nice. But one of the big advantages I think the Tiger P had, especially in the road wheel design, was the fact that with interlocks, especially on the production Tiger ones, mud got into those interlocking wheels very, very easily, and really that wouldn't be a problem until that mud dried. When that mud dried, those wheels got jammed. And to really clean them, it was a nightmare because in some cases you had to take off those interlocking road wheels, and it would take hours. With this design, it's a lot easier to take off and remove the tracks. It's easier for mud to not get caked up or clean. You can clean mud out of those road wheels. I think this design is superior. But I'm sensing more butts coming up forward, so please give me some mercy.
However, to be honest, that's offset by the whole spontaneous combustion and literally everything else breaking thing.
Yeah.
But not to worry. Porsche is so confident that he's got his contract on lock, he's ordered serial production already, churning out 100 hulls in preparation for deployment. But oh no, he has some stiff competition. Because as we know looking in retrospect, the Henschel company has a tank comparable in performance, and even better, it works.
Yeah. Now, real quick, to talk about those interlocking road wheels, you can actually see them right there. I mean, look at that thing. Tell me you're a tanker and mud and gunk and blood and whatever gets stuck in those road wheels and then it dries. How much of a pain in the ass do you think it's going to be to clean all of that? That is a nightmare to clean. That shit is making anyone who's an E4 in the world is looking at that thing, thinking of the mud gunking up that works, and they're thinking, I've got to bring all my shamming skills to get the fuck out of that work. Oh my god.
Alongside Porsche, Henschel too had been contracted to develop the various medium and heavy tank projects throughout the lead-up and early years of the war. The one mentioned earlier, Project VK30.01, was one that Henschel had committed quite heavily to, with 4 hulls being made for testing and evaluation. 2 of the hulls, surviving the testing and subsequent cancellation of the project, would both be developed into what was known as the Steyr Emil tank destroyers, named Max and Moritz, both of which would be lost on the Eastern Front, with the Soviets capturing Moritz at Stalingrad and later preserving him in the Kubyenka Tank Museum.
Which is a shame.
Point is, Henschel had a practical design philosophy going forward, and their later VK3601 project, which resembles an almost miniature Tiger, is evidence of that. To Henschel, the task was a simple one. Find the biggest tank components currently in serial production in Germany, assemble them together to be compatible with Krupp's turret, put them in a massive armor-plated box, and hey presto, you have one fuck-off huge heavy tank.
Yeah.
In fact, it was a really heavy tank. While Porsche's Tiger had gone for the high-end and sleek approach, Henschel went in with a sledgehammer. Granted, it was a highly engineered German sledgehammer, but it was a sledgehammer nonetheless. The Henschel Tiger came in a full 10 tons heavier than Porsche's design.
Wait a minute, this thing came in... I didn't even know that. What? The Tiger 1, the Henschel design was 10 tons heavier? Fucking A, I like the Tiger P even more. Lightweight. That's actually more useful. Jesus. Fucking A, even more. And the Tiger P had better armor. It was thicker armor at the front. Fucking A. Ugh.
Total of 57 tons at combat weight.
I love the Tiger P even more now.
In terms of armor protection, while it wasn't sloped armor, it made up for that in sheer thickness. The front armor of the Tiger was 100mm thick. That's 4 inches for those of you who use Freedom units. And 120mm thick on the gun mount. Side armor was 60mm thick, while the upper hull and side turret were 80mm thick. The roof, however, was only 25mm thick, resistant to small arms and AT rifles, but not much else. To improve effectiveness on the armor, the Tiger crews would often angle their tank at a 30 to 45 degree angle relative to the enemy in order to maximize armor performance, essentially achieving the slope that the armor itself lacks. However, protection isn't what this thing is best at, despite being what it's famous for. Other than breaking down, but we'll get to that. The 88mm gun on this bad boy was a dedicated anti-tank 88. The KWK-36 had an insanely flat shell trajectory over long distances, combined with a shell that had the ballistic properties of a semi-trailer going 3 times the speed of sound.
Well, Nathan, back in the day, Porsche used to build tanks. That's what I want Porsche to start building. I want them to rebuild the Tiger Porsche, because nowadays, with modern technology, especially in the terms of the gas-electric engine, that thing can run smooth.
Short of the infamous railway guns or self-propelled German infrastructure,
then there's
the
those
Soviets made later, such as the ISU-152, the gun on the Tiger was simply silly. It could murder anything in the Allied arsenal from a distance, rendering the Tiger itself impervious to enemy fire. In open country, there was simply nothing that could touch it until the IS-2 and the Pershing arrived at the very end of the war. And given the fact that it had German optics, namely a TZF-9... I'm not even going to attempt that shit.
Don't worry.
Which, as I established in my Bismarck video, which you should go watch if you haven't already,
we'll get to it.
Allows you to see individual fleas on a dog at 10 miles.
Mm-hmm.
This made the Tiger's gun ridiculously accurate. British tests post-war had it routinely hitting a 16 by 18 inch target at a distance of 3,600 feet away, or a 410 by 460 millimeter target at 1.1 kilometers away for those of us who live in the civilized world. But now for the fun part. As stated above, the Henschel design was more conventional than that of the Porsche design. But lest we forget that we are discussing German engineering here.
Okay.
And so while it was an absolute masterpiece of what technology you can achieve, and while it was the pinnacle of said conventional technology, it also meant that you needed the right parts, hours of training, large amounts of money, and endless resources to refine the components to precise tolerances.
Which Germany doesn't have.
In short, let's talk about the shit that broke. Now, I'm being
Everything.
a little harsher than I need to be, if I'm being honest. But one can't deny that the Tiger's history is one of great combat success that caused logisticians and operations officers to consider whether a 9mm leaf pass was a superior option. Let's talk about the engine.
Oh boy.
The engine was, rather hilariously given the reputation for German technical superiority, an accident. You see, besides the really dumb design for Porsche's petrol-electric drive thing, he actually had a good reason for using two diesel engines, as they were smaller than one big engine. Now, why is that important? Well, you see, the Germans hadn't built a big enough diesel engine that had sufficient power to drive the new Wonder Panzer. Not to mention the shortage of diesel, which is ironic considering how much a tank of this size will use. I mean, technically a U-boat engine could do it, but, you know, weight
A little big.
and space. So they used a gasoline engine. The 21.35-litre 12-cylinder Maybach HL210, making 650 horsepower. However, that was amazingly not enough to haul the tank properly, and the drivers kept breaking it, which is technically user error. But again, we are coming up to late 1942, and making your tank more user-friendly is going to be important, considering your drivers are very soon going to be either the older technophobe demographic, or the just-out-of-Hitler Youth Camp demographic. In fact, the Hitler Youth did raise their own tank division,
Yeah,
the
they
12th
did.
SS Panzer Division Hitler Jugend. So after the first 250 Tigers were made, they upgraded to the Maybach HL230, which was the same engine but used a cast iron engine block, which meant they could make the engine chunkier.
Yay.
We're up to 700 horsepower now, which is still not enough given that the comparable Allied tanks had better, but I guess even the Germans have
Hell,
to pay
some
attention
American
to
tanks were
mechanical
using
and economic
aircraft
realities on
engines.
occasion. Then again, they built their big scary tank before everyone else, so they get a couple years head start. This engine, through a drivetrain, powered the infamous Tiger transmission located near the driver, mounted low in the front, which in turn drove the front sprockets and ran the tracks. Meanwhile, steering and operation had gotten quite the upgrade with a hydraulic semi-automatic pre-selector gearbox with 8 gears in total. A very powerful ring brake to allow for the stopping of such a large vehicle, even while going at high speed, and even, would you believe it, a steering wheel.
Yep.
But what was really special was the steering itself, making use of a double differential linked into the gears, meaning that despite being such a sizable tank, the Tiger could be rather nimble when it needed. However, more importantly, when shifted into neutral gear, the tracks could be independently powered in opposite directions, giving the Tiger neutral traverse. The ability to pivot in place without moving. This was something that not many World War II tanks could do. It was essentially only the later model German and British vehicles that could do this. And while it put strain on the engine, transmission and tracks, it allowed for some crazy maneuvers. Tiger ace Michael Wittmann, who we will talk about later, used this capability while simultaneously using the higher RPM to spin the turret, allowing for the fastest traverse speed possible. Speaking of turret traverse, in the movies, the Tiger has been given a bad rap when it comes to turret traverse speed, but in reality it was actually quite impressive. The Sturm L4 hydraulic motor was linked into the main engine of the vehicle via a secondary drive shaft and allowed for a 6 degree per second traverse. Now that isn't that fast, taking 5 minutes to do a 360 degree sweep. However, because it's linked into the engine, when the RPMs on the main engine are higher, the gunner could switch traverse into a high-speed mode, meaning consequentially, under the right engine conditions, the turret could be traversed progressively faster depending on the vehicle's RPM. Hence, as we see here, with Maho's epic skills. So if you are driving along on an attack and sight a target, the gunner could slew the turret around at up to 36 degrees a second, call the driver to halt, acquire the target, and shoot. This shit works in reverse too, which, again, due to the higher RPMs, allows him to acquire and engage targets effectively during a retreat, and in the case of a really experienced crew, such as Wittmann's, they can do that while moving.
Whitman was a little bit.
This tank is a monster.
It was.
So
Yeah, Tiger
cool.
1's a monster.
But, like all Veraboo fantasies, they are precisely that. Fantasies. Because besides the transmission braking, besides the engine being sensitive until the upgrade, and even then it still needed proper maintenance regularly, even under combat conditions, to keep running, despite all of that, there is one major part of the Tiger that undermines everything else.
And that is?
Now, ask yourselves, dear viewers, what is the weakest part of a tank? What is the thing that you shoot at when literally nothing else is working? The tracks? The tracks. Gold star to that man in the third row. Yes. The Tiger had 16 torsion bar suspension, 8 bars aside, with alternating swing arms to save space. Looking good so far. Nothing amiss here. Very cool. And then they fuck it up. Remember how I said that the Porsche Tiger's track layout was weird for late?
Oh yeah, here we go.
Due to the weight of the vehicle and its size, Henschel wanted to make the weight distribution as even as possible across the tracks, which is why the Tiger, like mentioned earlier, was designed to use interleaved road wheels. Now, if you look at this handy, quick little montage here, tell me what you don't see on literally any modern tracked vehicle.
You don't see any of that shitty interlocking designs.
Bingo. Now, I hear you ask, but you said it's more efficient, Pac-Man. Why wouldn't it be used on modern vehicles? Well, imagine, if you will, you're under fire. Shells are whizzing past. Your Tiger is impervious to most arms, so they take out your tracks to mobility kill you. Now, while you are impervious to what they're shooting at you, if you can't move, they can bring in artillery, which can go up to, 150mm shells, so that can kill you. Or they can bring in air power to launch a precision strike, or, even better, the infantry can close and engage with either man-pats, that being man-portable anti-tank like a bazooka or a Panzer Shrek, or even a satchel charge and demo blocks. So you need to fix said track to survive, or even if you are just on a movement to a staging area and your track breaks, in combat, time is probably the most crucial factor.
Oh yeah.
The tank's big advantage is that it is a bunker that can move. And with this wheel setup, to change the tracks, you have to remove both the tracks and, depending where the damage is, half the wheels as well. But wait, it gets better.
Oh, does it now?
The interleaved wheels and their subsequent sensitive tolerances meant that any damage...
I mean, look at that. Look at that. Oh my god, could you imagine being the poor sap that gets volunteered to clean those wheels? You gotta take one look at that and can I go to the front lines, please? It's more preferable out there. It's quicker. Whoops. Hit my own, oh shit. Yeah. But yeah, this is just so wrong. This is why I also lean more towards the Tiger Porsche. The Tiger Porsche would have been much easier to have maintenance with their wheels. It would have been easier to work with their tracks. This is just stupid. Stupid. Oh my god. Yeah, I can bet. Like, oh my god.
Damage required real replacement, but it's not just damage you have to worry about, but environmental and logistics factors.
Here comes the mud!
In poor terrain, like deep snow or quagmire like mud, the Tiger was extremely susceptible to wheel jams. The Russian mud...
Look at this poor sap. Look at this guy. Look at this poor guy just looking at that and going, fuck my life. This man is not enjoying his life right now. This guy is saying, oh, thank God it's not me. Oh, wait, I'm on the crew. Fuck. Fuck. Just look at the mud caked up on that. Yes, I said poor sap. Yeah, look at... How else would you describe this man? Look at him. Oh, my God, the poor fuck.
Mud season, known as the Rasputitsa, was especially nasty, as seen in this photo here.
Oh.
And as such, every time it occurred, they had to pull everything off, clear it up, and then put it all back. And this went as far as the strategic redeployment of the tank. Yes, even when nothing was happening, even when they were just moving it from one place to another, due to the width of the tracks, the Tiger could not be transported on the standard rail gauge without modification, as the track edges extend too far out, given that the vehicle is so wide. As such, when being redeployed via rail, every Tiger had to have its outermost wheels removed and special transport tracks fitted, which would take 30 minutes to an hour on each vehicle. However, of course, the saner minds prevailed, and the German E4 Mafia intervened, and would usually check to see if there were any tunnels on the route. If there weren't, they would violate standing orders, which is, you know, standard, and leave the combat tracks on so they could just roll the tanks right off. That was a problem the crews could sort of work around. They could sort of get around those pesky little rules and regulations and adapt to the situation.
E4s.
The other problem was something they couldn't work around. That being the laws of physics. They're a bitch like that.
Oh, yeah. Physics
Given
suck.
the Tiger weighed 57 tons, the tank was so heavy that it was actually unable to cross 1/3 of all the bridges in Europe. Which, when you want to do a Blitzkrieg, an operation based on speed and
Again,
maneuver,
the Tiger P's
is
looking
kinda
up
kicking
so
dick.
much.
Fortunately, though, the design team thought of this. While Porsche's Tiger was designed to make use of U-boat technology, the Henschel team decided that the simplest solution to cross rivers was for the Tiger not to simply emulate the U-boat. The Tiger was to become the U-boat. Genius. The rear compartments of the vehicle were able to be flooded. This was to be combined with a large, complex snorkel assembly and ventilation system, while a giant rubber donut, yes, you heard that correctly, was inflated like a floaty around the turret ring to make it airtight, allowing the tank to, in theory, ford bodies of water at least up to 15 feet, 4.5 meters deep. I don't have any sources on how many Tiger prototypes gave their lives to test this, but I'll tell you why I wouldn't want to try it.
Nope. This is even more making the case far more practical. Suddenly, the Tiger P is looking far more practical. Because at this point, the only thing wrong with that tank was the engine. This thing has so much wrong with it. Fuck me. Suddenly, I don't feel ashamed for liking the Tiger P better. It is obviously the superior heavy tank. And if anyone has a problem with that, fight me. Oh.
However, people rightly assessed that the amount of setup time, equipment, the expense, the logistical requirement, and most of all the risk of drowning was not worth the effort, and
I'm sorry, but oh my god, yeah, I'm sorry, oh, Tiger of the Lake, what is your wisdom? You should have gone with the Tiger P. At least that shit could have crossed bridges.
Only 495 of the Tigers were ever fitted with this system before it was removed from production. All that said, however, the Tiger 1 was a truly magnificent design for its time. In fact, I think what Jeremy Clarkson famously says about Alfa Romeos applies here as well. when the Germans design a tank, they design a tank to be as good as a tank can be, briefly. Besides, it's not like we're starving for resources, trained manpower, and have a huge budget and trade deficit. I mean, what's the harm in building a tank that costs 4 times that of our most effective armoured fighting vehicle, the Stug 3? You know, the thing that's getting a kill-death ratio of like 10 to 1 and we can mass produce.
Yeah, that's fair.
And so,
Stug
in
life,
August of
baby.
1942, the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger was put into production. And despite a few changes over time, such as the famous Zimmerit
Stug
paste
3,
and
favorite
smoke
assault
canister
gun.
launches,
Yes, there's
its
a difference.
iconic, blocky, angry shape,
If it were up to me, I'd have an army of Tiger Ps and Stug 3s, and I would conquer everything. Starting with some certain assholes in this world.
remained a source of terror for Allied and Soviet crews
life is best life.
until its bigger,
Same with Tiger
scarier
P.
descendant appeared, striking terror into every gearbox
God.
in Germany before it caught fire and everybody laughed. And, as if it foretold the coming of weeb tank enthusiasts, the user manual...
Oh
the
yeah, I
Tiger for
forgot
days,
about
came
these!
complete with scantily
Now I'm
clad 2D
officially
women and a series of
demonetized.
cheesy jokes and catchy rhymes to make sure the crews learned how to operate their vehicle. Well, it obviously worked on the weeb front anyway, since the Japanese bought one.
Yeah.
But given they had some logistical issues of a certain enterprising kind,
yeah.
getting it back to Japan proved difficult, and so in a beautifully hilarious piece of red tape, the Japanese leased the Tiger they bought back to the Wehrmacht. Fucking hell. Ultimately, 1,347 Tiger 1s would be built. 18 of these hulls would be converted into the Sturmtiger assault gun, while Porsche's 100 useless hulls would be converted to the Ferdinand or the Elephant tank destroyer, which didn't help much on the useless front as they were a pile of shit, but they certainly looked cool. And thus, there in the scorching flames of the Ruhr Valley's steel forges and the towering caverns of Henschel's factory, an illustrious career was born. You know what time it is, boys. Cue the Sabaton!
Death in the shape of a Panzer battalion.
Ironic though, because this song is more about Desert Storm.
Okay, so I know that song is about Operation Iraqi Freedom, but Tiger units were deployed in their own
that's right,
dedicated heavy
Iraqi
tank
Freedom. My
battalions,
bad.
and the song's an absolute banger, so fuck it.
Fair enough.
Speaking of, those independent tank battalions have this handy little table of organization.
Great, more organization.
Pretty nice, huh?
Shoot me.
Due to the Tigers being such a powerful weapon system, while also being very limited in number, the Germans couldn't field entire divisions of them. As such,
Scusi, everyone. Take a minute to learn. I need to let the dog outside. I'm coming, boy. I hear you. I'm coming. Don't be too long. It's hot. It's bloody April, and we're already approaching the 90-degree mark. Fucking God. At least it's cheaper than California.
they were treated as strategic level assets to be attached to units in need of their services, rather than as a default line unit. Now, those among you who are paying attention can see the headache this poses right off the bat.
Yep.
The Tiger's logistical woes, coupled with the absolute shit show that was...
How? This... How? How the fuck did somebody fucking... I don't...
was the German logistics system in general, which Tick, a famous historian, thinks that anarcho-capitalism is the answer to solving, made redeployments very difficult. Just to give you guys an idea regarding how bad German logistics was, the German army's total truck production across 1939 to 1942 was, to make a swag or a scientific wild-ass guess, in the 15 to 20,000 range, and I'm pretty sure I'm being generous there, but that's just me spitballing. Point is, it was not huge. They didn't have enough trucks, basically.
No, they didn't.
Now, consider that they are suffering a rubber shortage and a fuel shortage, and they are supporting an army that's in the 4 million personnel range, along with the Luftwaffe. To be blunt, it's impossible with just their domestic tank production and their domestic truck production. They don't have enough vehicles. So, how do they handle it? They rob every country in Europe for their trucks, except for their Fords. The Fords are purchased as Henry willingly sells them to them. As seen with this Ford truck during Operation Barbarossa right here.
Yep.
But the long and short of it is, the German army in 1941 and 1942 embarked on the largest invasion of human history, with about 12 to 14 different types of truck, each of them with their own unique spares, service life, design features and flaws, etc. And given that the Soviet rail gauge is different from European rail gauge, and the Soviets scorch earth anything they can't take,
Oh, and there's the dog letting me know. One moment. Boy. What's that on your back?
can't capture Soviet rolling stock. They also have to relay the entirety of the Soviet rail net. And with all of this going on, you decide that you are going to field the most technically advanced weapon system in the world, which is notorious for having highly sensitive tolerances. The result was that once Tigers were posted somewhere, it was a huge operation to redeploy them, and it couldn't be done quickly. As a result, they tended to be bound by theatre of operation, but in a sense of happy misfortune, the Eastern Front was exactly where they needed to be anyway. However, their debut would not be the most glamorous, for you see, the Charlie Chaplin-looking motherfucker in Berlin wanted to make use of his new toy, and ordered them deployed before any serious combat trials had been performed to determine employment and field performance. So of all the places for the Tiger to be deployed, they were sent north to Leningrad.
Oh boy.
Now, here is a map of Leningrad, or St. Petersburg as it's known today. Notice the terrain. Swamp, swamp, city, town, forest, forest, swamp. Oh, look, rivers. Lots and lots of rivers. In fact, that's a fucking shitload of rivers.
Yeah.
Now, this is a tank that can only cross certain bridges and terrain due to its weight. It's experimental, which means its crews haven't had a chance to work with it and, work it out. And both its armor profile and gun are optimally suited to long-range engagements, and this area is entirely forest, swamp, or urban environments.
Yeah.
So what happened? Well, the Tigers rolled along the front line of Army Group North and the Leningrad perimeter. No real big engagements of note occurred. However, the Tiger Company suffered incredibly from engine breakdowns.
Oh, yeah?
They were going through transmissions and gearboxes like the JDM drift scene, only with more hostile reception. The crews had not worked out the 210 engines yet and were killing their vehicles. What's worse is that due to the terrain, they had to use the narrow Russian roads, making proper offensive operations with their gigantic heavy Tiger tanks virtually impossible. However, virtually impossible is not actually impossible, so they did try. Assaulting a Soviet position, the Tigers formed line and advanced. However, in going off-road to form this attack formation, one of the vehicles immediately bogged down. While trying to cover their comrades and perhaps recover the vehicle, the Soviets, seeing this, immediately began hitting the small unit of Tigers with literally everything they had.
And I don't blame them!
Germans, quite sensibly, decided that this was not a wonderful place to be and withdrew, abandoning the vehicle. And so, after all of that build-up, all of that hype, all of the amazing hope the Germans had for their new, illustrious Wunderwaffe, the great wonder weapon to defeat the Soviets once and for all, the first combat action of this illustrious weapon, the Panzerkampfwagen 6 Tiger, achieved precisely one thing, handing their brand new super tank, completely intact and functional, to the Soviet Union. Upon its capture, Soviet NKVD intelligence troops immediately seized it for testing, shipping it to the Red Army proving grounds as fast as possible. Upon arrival at said proving grounds, they threw everything they had at it. I mean everything. There weren't enough kitchen sinks in Moscow for this fucking thing. Right? They threw everything at it. And what resulted from these tests was the nomination of some poor bastard who had to go up to the big man Joe and say, and I am paraphrasing here, "Hey boss, we've got nothing that works against this thing, like,
at
all. Wonder how long he lived."
Should we investigate? Should you shut the fuck up before you get us both killed?
True story! I know that scene. That's from the movie The Death of Stalin, and that shit really happened. Go watch that movie. It's fucking hilarious. Plus, it pisses off Putin. But yeah, like, literally, that poor son of a bitch, he has to walk into Stalin's office, look all nice, and then says, boss, we don't have anything that can kill this thing. What about you? Can this kill you? Bang. Oh, poor sap. Poor boy.
Anyway, essentially, Soviet guns fitted to tanks, as well as general-purpose anti-tank guns, including the brand new Ziz-3, could do precisely, and I'm using a scientific term here, dick. They could do precisely dick to the Tiger, unless they had a flat angle and were really close.
Yeah.
Only the self-propelled guns like the Su-152 or KV-2 stood any chance at all, and they were not numerous enough or even remotely suitable for an anti-tank role. Meanwhile, the Tiger could wipe out any Soviet vehicle or gun position with absolute impunity.
Yeah.
This was, of course, the conclusion the British drew as well. After a reasonably successful debut in Tunisia, where the Tiger could operate in the open spaces it was designed for, British Churchill tanks of the 142nd Royal Armoured Corps moved to relieve a unit of the 2nd Battalion Sherwood Foresters dug in around the town of Guriel El Atak, Tunisia. Upon reaching the area, they found a beleaguered force of infantry trying to hold off a monstrous tank charging them down.
Oh.
The Churchills had arrived at just the right time, and they engaged with their 6-pounders, to no effect. And so they advanced, and fired again. This time, 3 direct hits were scored, right in the middle of the vehicle. The turret on the Tiger started grinding and then stopped. Meanwhile, inside the vehicle, half the crew were wounded and their radio was destroyed. Realizing their vehicle was combat ineffective without their turret and radio, the crew abandoned their Tiger and evacuated the wounded men. The British immediately captured the vehicle, and used spares from the other Tigers they had destroyed nearby to restore it to running order. It was later inspected by both King George VI and Winston Churchill, before it was sent home to the UK for extensive evaluation. This was, of course, Tiger 131, the only original Tiger in full working order that survives today. It starred in the movie Fury,
I want to see that
the first
tank one
appearance
day.
of a genuine Tiger on film since 1950, and is the pride and joy of Bovington Tank Museum.
I will see that tank one day. I will give that tank a hug.
But while all this had been going on, things had not exactly been going well for our one bollocked wonder in the Reichskanzlei. Despite his new weapons coming on stream and the damage the German forces had been doing to British and Soviet forces, things were starting to unravel. The Americans finally decided they wanted in on this thing and landed in West Africa with hell on wheels and the Big Red Run in front.
Yeah.
They were being capably led by one George S. Patton. To the east, the British 8th Army, under the command of one of the most insufferable and annoying men in human history, Sir Bernard Montgomery, was pushing Rommel into a corner. But most critically of all, the entirety of the German 6th Army had been enveloped and destroyed in the frozen ruins of what was once the showpiece of the Soviet Union, the jewel on the Volga known as the city of Stalingrad. In the aftermath of that particular disaster, the Soviets launched an absolutely apocalyptic counterattack in 2 major sectors of the front. One of them was a spoiling attack to pin down the reserves from Army Group Center. This was around the city of Rzhev and had been ongoing since the operation to surround Stalingrad was underway. This operation was known as Operation Mars. The main thrust, meanwhile, was aimed at the Don River Basin, with the goal of capturing Donetsk and Rostov-on-Don. If the Soviets could successfully take these cities, while the Germans were still falling back from the Caucasus Mountains and Stalingrad itself, they would essentially have cut off the entirety of the Army Group South. As such, it was here that the bulk of the new Tigers were sent. Using them as a heavy reserve, our famous friend Erich von Manstein coordinated one of the finest fighting retreats in military history, eventually stopping the Russian offensive to the southwest of the embattled city of Kharkov.
Haven't seen it yet. I plan to.
However, given what we know about Manstein and the German
Because
Panzer
it looks
Corps in general,
fucking
however,
excellent.
we know that this wasn't
No
going to be
thoughts
enough
just
for
yet.
them.
Haven't seen it.
With a majority of premium replacements now being shifted to Army Group South, Tigers and Panzer IVFs were arriving en masse, as Manstein was assigned the 2nd SS Panzer Corps, comprised of Das Reich, Totenkopf, and most notably of all, the Leibstandarte Arthouse Asshole. With these new formations, he counterattacked towards the city, cutting off and obliterating the Soviet armoured spearheads. The Soviets were sent reeling, as with a combination of new hardware and ideological fanaticism, the SS divisions and their attached heavy panzer battalions began systematically eradicating everything in their path.
Yes, they
And the
do.
situation for the defenders only got worse, as alongside the SS panzer divisions, Manstein had sent in the Wehrmacht's Gross Deutschland division, the Wehrmacht's most elite and well-equipped formation. Combine all of this with a renewed Luftwaffe presence provided by Luftflotte 4, and you have a simply unstoppable force. By March 15th, Kharkov had been recaptured. The Soviets had lost 80,000 men to the Germans' 11,000. Generals Vatutin and Rokossovsky had been pushed right back out of Army Group South's AO. However, the Soviet forces to the north had gained far more success.
I've never played Call of Duty Mobile.
Advancing steadily to the west, they had advanced all the way forward and created this situation.
Oh, here we go.
A huge bulge had formed around the city of Kursk. And this huge bulge in the Eastern Front, in keeping with the weird crossover between Nazis and furries,
Shut the fuck up
this
right
bulge
now!
was noticed. Ooh woo.
You son of a bitch! I am going to eviscerate you, you fucking Aussie! I am... Whoa.
Unzip your baggiest pants, oh baby, you so musky. Take me home, pet me, and make me yours, and don't forget to stuff me. See me like my little baby tail for your bulgy.
I need a fucking minute. Be right back. You son of a bitch! You fuck! To my failing liver. God damn it. Oh, that burns good. Oh. Continue. No more furry jokes.
Who the fuck writes this shit? You know what?
You do,
No,
you fuck!
I can't believe that joke made it into the script. How the fuck did that make it into the script? I don't give a fuck. It's bullshit. Did somebody say gratuitous sabaton?
Into the motherland, the German army marched.
You insult us
So
furries,
here
and then
we
you
are.
go into this.
The Kursk salient. Now, funny thing about the word salient. Do you know what its definition is? In language terms, it means the most important, or rather more accurately, the most noticeable. After the success of the Kharkov counteroffensive by Army Group South, the conspicuous Bulge
Shut!
had formed in the front line in between Army Group South and Army Group Center. The Soviets had pushed numerous guards formations through the area, but when their comrades on the left flank had been routed, they found themselves rather exposed, spread out, and in front of the primary Soviet positions around the city of Kursk. Hence the salient's name. Now, given what we know about the German way of war, that is, to encircle the enemy forces with speed and aggression through concentration of force, what you think happened did happen. The OKW and the OKH, as well as Mr. Fast and Furious himself, looked at the map and thought, aha! The perfect place to attack! We'll pinch them off and crush them with our superior German might. Well, not everyone. Guderian asked him if he was delusional, considering the pressure they were under on the other fronts, while Albert Speer pointed out the fact that the Wehrmacht was simply not in a logistical position to undertake an offensive of that size. Even Myrtle, who was rather committed to the regime as well as stereotypes, I mean, check the monocle on this guy, even he was recommending an active defense with operations to hit on the counter later in the year. But they were, as usual, overruled. Boss man knew best after all, that's why he's in charge. That said, it was Manstein's plan, and he had probably gotten a bit cocky after his big win at Kharkov, so the chief paperhanger can't be held completely accountable for this one. But calling back to the definition of salient, the reason why the Wehrmacht had been so successful up to now is they had moved quickly with the initiative and kept the enemy off balance. Not to mention they had used surprise to an extensive degree in all their major operations thus far. However, our German friends had forgotten, in their arrogance, that the angry Bolsheviks across the street also happened to have maps. And even better, they so happen to live here.
Yeah.
And
like
when the
place.
Stavka met to discuss its plans for the upcoming summer offensives, they looked at the map and went, huh, where do you think they're going to go? I don't know. Maybe right here, pointing to the massively obvious target to anyone with one brain cell. So they decided to dig in around Kursk while reinforcing it to all fuckery. Now,
I'm watching
I
out
want to
for
point out
furry
here,
jokes
just as a
now.
side
I am
note, 'cause this isn't
watching
actually in the original
you.
script, the Germans did lobby Mustache Man to actually launch the attack early, as they knew that the Russians would dig in if they didn't. However, he wanted all his super weapons ready to go, and so forced them to delay. So there is that little tidbit. I thought I'd chuck that in there. Anyway, moving on, back to the Soviets. Yeah, they planted something like 400,000 mines. They also laid 1,000 miles of barbed wire and trenches.
They turned that place into the fucking
and lots
stone.
of fucking trenches. In fact, if you lined up all the trenches they dug, you could dig a continuous ditch from Moscow to Madrid.
Jesus.
In fact, the Soviets were such mad lads, they actually trained sappers to lay mines in front of German tanks on the move.
Oh, yeah.
They would spontaneously lay minefields in front of the
Fucking
German
Russians.
They're insane.
It's amazing the kind of motivation you get when there's a gun pointed at your head from your commissar, right, guys?
They taught their AT gunners to shoot the barrels off enemy heavy tanks, for fuck's sake. They're nuts. The only chance the Germans had of even attempting this was, as I said before, to hit immediately before they were ready. But the side fringe fascist wanted his new Panzer V Panthers to join in, so yeah, didn't happen. Several months go by, and the Soviets are now so dug in, ExxonMobil is suing for copyright infringement and patent violations for their drilling. But The new Panthers have arrived, so the Russians shouldn't stand a chance. The offensive, now known as Operation Citadel, was ready to commence. The forces assembled here were something that really no one can comprehend. It may actually be the largest singular battle in human history. While Stalingrad and Verdun and the other large battles of modern history lasted so long, they could actually be considered campaigns rather than battles. The Battle of Kursk lasted just over a month, and during that month there was never a true lull in the fighting. It kept going for that entire month. In this moderately sized sector of the front lines, I mean by Eastern Front standards, in this little bulge right here, 3.5 million men, 10,000 tanks, and 5,000 planes fought a bitter struggle to the death. And on July the 5th, 1943, that struggle began. The Soviets, having heard the engines starting and having seen the Germans mobilizing along the front, had a guess as to where the enemy assembly areas were and raked them with Katyusha barrages. The result was devastating.
Oh, yeah.
But the Germans, not perturbed by this, began their assault. With practically all the heavy panzers in their arsenal, Tigers, Elephants, and Panthers now available, all of the heavy tanks available to the Wehrmacht were right here. This battle was the showdown. And with such weapons and the superior Aryan race at the helm, how could it fail? Yep. Despite making some early inroads, the Germans eventually hit what can only be described as the Great Wall of Ivan, getting horribly bogged down and eventually stopped cold, which of course leads to...
My boy Zhukov! God, I want a uniform like that!
The Soviet counterattack was absolutely ferocious, slamming into the forward elements of the panzer divisions in this typical Soviet sledgehammer style. The 503rd and 505th Heavy Tank Battalions got to work and began cutting down T-34s like scythes through a wheat field.
Yeah, that's true.
But the sheer number of Soviet tanks was beginning to wear them down.
They're running out of ammo.
It must be said here, however,
parts.
that the Tigers' performance during the Battle of Kursk was exemplary, and it was their presence which made the difference between a defeat and a total rout. The Panther, having been rushed into service, was suffering numerous technical issues, with a serviceability rate that got as low as 16%. The Ferdinand tank destroyers, meanwhile, had achieved excellent combat results in the open plains in stationary firing positions, so basically when they were used as giant anti-tank guns, but couldn't partake in any of the serious offensive actions due to their transmissions breaking on a 5-degree incline or their engines spontaneously combusting. Any attempt to maneuver or reposition them also resulted in breakdowns so severe they rendered the vehicle totally inoperable. When you combine this with the prolific use of AT mines from the Soviet defenders, the result was embarrassing. The 653rd Heavy Panzerjäger Battalion started the battle with 45 Ferdinands, and by the end of combat,
I know they're called Ferdinands, I don't give a shit.
They were down to 12. Of all the wonder tanks Germany had assembled to save the Reich, only the Tigers were working. And during this titanic clash, there were countless moments. But for brevity, I will talk about the two most famous ones.
Let's hear 'em.
The first was, of course, the Battle of Prokhorovka. By the 12th of July 1943, the German offensive had reached its zenith. The Soviets had worn them down and stopped them. Now all that was left was to counterattack, and it was General Rodmistrov's 5th Guards Tank Army that was assigned the task. At 8:30 in the morning, after an artillery barrage, 500 Soviet tanks with their infantry riding on their backs charged down the German positions, raining hellfire from their guns as they went. Their attack was so horrific that it looked like it would succeed, but unfortunately for the Soviets, the elements they were facing were the SS Panzer divisions of 2nd SS Panzer Corps, and in the lead was the most elite unit of the German ground units, the aforementioned Leibstandarte Art School reject, 1st SS Panzer. The lead elements of the Soviet attack were wiped out, losing 62 tanks and forcing them back. This drove the 18th Soviet Tank Corps to attempt a flanking maneuver around them, with the goal of, as the youth call it today, pulling an Obi-Wan.
I have the high ground!
However, there was a rather distinct problem with that, as on that particular piece of high ground was the 4 Tigers attached to 1st SS Recon Battalion. And the commander of this Tiger group was a young man by the name of Michael Wittmann.
Asshole first degree.
From ranges of 1,000 meters right down to point-blank range, the men of what would become the leaders of the 101st SS Heavy Tank Battalion and their 4 Tigers tore the Soviets apart. But the fighting was, without doubt, the most intense tank warfare in history. At one stage, Wittmann's gunner destroyed a T-34, setting it alight, only for it to keep driving at them, ramming into their Tiger. Luckily for Wittmann and his crew, their shot had slowed them down enough to prevent any critical damage. There was no actual figure of how many tanks they ended up destroying in this individual action, but what is for sure is that all 4 of the Tigers survived. The few T-34s that had made it past Wittmann's unit were destroyed by the 2nd SS Panzer Grenadier Regiment under the command of Joachim Peiper, and the Soviet attack was eventually repulsed. By the end of the day, Wittmann and his men had held the line, with the wreckage of Soviet tanks stretching to the horizon. However, the finest example of the Tiger occurred earlier that week. Staff Sergeant Franz Staudager, from the same unit as Wittmann, though in a different element, was advancing his Tiger 1 through a town after serious combat during the day. His tracks were shot to hell, and his running gear in disrepair. The recovery elements of his unit worked hard to get his tank back into fighting shape. When up ahead, the nearby Panzer Grenadier unit, holding the perimeter around the town, came under attack by the Soviet 10th Tank Corps. The Germans were in a tight situation. No armor was readily available to repel this attack, and the infantry were hard pressed. 50 T-34s commenced an assault, quickly overrunning the perimeter and heading into the main defensive line. Staudager's Tiger was finally repaired, at which point the mechanics switched to another Tiger too damaged to move. They fully expected Staff Sergeant Staudager to withdraw and save his vehicle. Nope. Staudager ordered his Tiger forward to the edge of the town to support the hard-pressed Panzer Grenadier unit. What ensued was one hell of a firefight. During the battle, his Tiger stood alone against the entire Soviet column. He had expended some ammunition in the fighting prior to this, but even so, he still had a considerable amount of armor piercing. This he kept sending downrange, wiping out one T-34 after another, until halfway through this firefight, his loader screamed over the intercom, around the incredible wall of noise, that they were down to high explosive. Staudager's response to this was, "Fuck it, my 88 gun is big enough," and so he started sending the HE as well, which in turn wiped out several more Soviet tanks. After the battle ended, the Soviets withdrew, leaving 22 of their comrades' tanks behind, burning or wrecked in the field. What's insane is, Staudager's kill tally is actually 24, because a couple nights before this he had walked up onto a group of T-34s, thinking in the dark that they were Panthers, only to realize they weren't. Once he noticed they were Soviets, he tossed grenades into the open hatches of 2 of the stationary tanks and fucking booked it back to his own.
I don't blame the guy!
Both the T-34s in the process. Needless to say, this man received the Knight's Cross, which is significant as he was the first Tiger crewman to receive such an honor. Conspicuous individual heroism and valor on the field of battle, however inspiring or important, usually only wins small unit actions. It doesn't win wars.
Nope.
And in this case, that was true.
Mm-hmm.
By July 14th, the Germans had run out of steam. They were stuck. And the Soviets began to roll them back. What's worse is that the Allies landed in Sicily the same week, drawing off the possibility of any reserves being sent to assist them.
Because now the Allies are in Europe!
They were committed. They had to continue the push, or at least coordinate a fighting retreat, but the emo authoritarian immediately ordered what reserves were present at Kursk to reinforce Italy, including a unit of Ferdinands. The tank that combusts spontaneously going up a 5-degree incline.
Oh, give my
in Italy. One of the most mountainous countries in Europe.
We get it!
Fuck me.
Ugh.
Naturally, the commanders on the ground threw a collective fit, but again, Der Führer is always right. Not that it actually matters. The Germans didn't stand a chance at this point anyway. As the Soviets attacked, the once proud panzer divisions fell back, once again leaving their brand new weapon, the Panther, behind, along with more examples of the German heavies. But most of all, they had left behind the initiative. They had turned over possession, and now the Soviets had the ball, and they were going to use it.
Oh, yeah.
With the Allies preparing for their major offensive to begin the long march to Berlin, everyone knew the war was lost. But given the circumstances, especially with the crimes of the Nazi regime currently underway, Germany had no alternative. They had one option.
Why am I getting high school flashbacks?
At this point, the career of our titular tank was essentially that of a fire engine. A heavily armed and armoured war criminal fire engine, but a fire engine nonetheless. As the Wehrmacht retreated on all fronts, the Tigers were constantly redeployed to different sectors, and due to the aforementioned logistical clusterfuck that is the Wehrmacht, and especially that of the Tiger, on many occasions the Tigers redeployed by road. Wear and tear on the vehicles was so extreme that the average nominal strength for a Tiger unit was often 50%, if not worse. The Battle of Kursk, a strategic level operation, was the only time the Tiger formations operated at full strength, and even then, only for a single day. Even so, this monster of a vehicle would have the last hurrah. Its replacement, the Tiger II, was now entering service, and, as though their cries were carried on the wind, the lamentations of every mechanic in the Panzerwaffe could be heard.
I bet.
Their anguished cries only to be silenced by the endless grinding disintegration of gearboxes and transmissions.
Yep.
Their production run on the Tiger I was stopped to make way for this new behemoth. The last of these new Tigers were redeployed to the west. The war may be lost, but the Reich's last hurrah would be carried forward on their tracks. All they needed was their opponent to come and face them. But given the weather, there's no way they're going to be at it this month. Hey, you guys see something out there? They look like boats. A lot of boats.
Oh shit, I think I see my grandpa flying above.
Holy shit.
Here comes D-Day!
June? In Normandy? Jesus, that's brave. Yes, as you're all well aware, on June 6th, 1944, Team Freedom decided that it was finally time for their whirlwind European tour. After all, it was unfair that DJ Harris had gotten all the fun up to now. The Germans, meanwhile, were kind of dumbfounded. Rommel, who was now in charge of forces in France, was visiting his wife for her birthday when the Allies showed up. However, despite being commander of the forces in theatre, he was not in overall command. That belonged to Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, and they didn't get along.
He was a paratrooper. He was on a C-47 with I Company.
Von Rundstedt was from a noble Prussian officer tradition, while Rommel was a self-made man. And because Rommel was a hard-charging lead from the front, always on the offense kind of field commander, while Rundstedt was the calculating staff officer type.
Oh boy.
Given the situation in France, Rommel assessed, quite correctly in my mind and in the view of most historians, that the armour reserves for the beach defences should be kept as close to the landing beaches as possible, due to the fact that Allied air supremacy would prevent a significant redeployment of the Panzers to the invasion area once it begins. As such, they would need to already be in place, ready to attack. Rundstedt, who thus far had only fought in the Blitz of 1940 or in the East, had not seen for himself the Allied Air Force's capabilities and favoured a more mobile reserve able to respond to any invasion area. The argument had been ongoing for months until the Bohemian corporal had intervened. He split the panzer divisions up into forward deployment and reserves and made it clear that the reserve panzers would only be moved on his express authority.
Moron!
All this solution achieved was to split an already thinly spread force into an even more thinly spread force
one-ball moron.
and render the reserve worthless and combat ineffective. And so, when the Allied invasion finally happened, the only Panzer division available to...
Thank you for the super chatter. Thank you. ISK 224.
Rommel was the 21st Panzer Division around Caen, and they had seized the initiative, driving a wedge straight between Juno and Sword Beach. In fact, they had almost succeeded in threatening the invasion in this sector. But without the backup of the other Panzer divisions, the Allies repulsed this effort and retook the offensive, throwing them right back to Caen. Due to the failure of the Allies to get significant numbers of armour on the beach, had Rommel been given the reserves, it's possible that they could have thrown everyone back into the channel, or at least done far more damage than they actually did. The Allied bridgehead by now, however, was secure, and they began pushing out into the surrounding countryside. However, the Bocage country, full of hedgerows and small hamlets, was an absolute paradise for the defensive forces. Almost no progress was being made, as the German defenders of the 91st and 352nd Infantry Divisions worked together with their comrades in the 6th Fallschirmjäger Regiment to hold off the invaders in a constant series of ferocious small unit engagements. In the American sector, Carentan and its surrounding countryside was the scene of dramatic combat between airborne forces of both sides, while Allied armoured formations were being savaged in deadly AT ambushes between the hedgerows. But it is in the British eastern sector where this battle was at its deadliest, as the British advance threatened Caen and the main roads into eastern France, Paris, and ultimately Germany. Therefore, the German High Command perceived this as the biggest threat. The bulk of German reserves was shifted to face the British advance. Moving under the cover of darkness to avoid the Allied air units, they crept into position. The British ran headlong into the reinforcements dug in around Caen, and were promptly hurled back. On the left flank, Panzer Lehr was rolling into position, and attached to them was the 101st SS Heavy Tank Battalion, with a full formation of Tigers. In fact, there were a considerable number of German heavies present in Normandy, due to just how many SS Panzer divisions were there in France under refit. The first wave of heavy armoured support for the Germans arrived on the 12th of June. The delay had been due to the distance combined with the aforementioned nighttime-only movements, as Allied fighter bombers laid waste to any traffic on the roads during the day. Now they were in position and ready to get to work. That night, they set up camp in the town of Villers-Bocage. The Allied thrust was mainly towards Caen and St. Lo.
Where's my helmet?
Should be quiet now.
1 second. Helmet equipped.
Finally. Not this time. It's time for payback.
Oh. Everybody gangster till the doom music hits!
On the 13th of June, the British 7th Armoured Division, known as the Desert Rats, advanced into the town. After encountering the German recon screen, they commenced an attack to the east, attempting to flank the main forces defending Caen to the north. As they proceeded along the main road, however, hell descended upon them. Having been alerted by said recon screen, Michael Wittmann had mounted his Tiger and immediately charged forward to engage, ordering his other tanks to follow once able. Bursting out of a hedge to the rear of the British column in an ambush, Wittmann destroyed the Sherman Firefly to the rear of the formation, as well as a Cromwell. While his comrades eliminated the rest of the column, he then turned down the road and charged, sending HE and MG rounds into everything he saw, wiping out an entire convoy's worth of Bren carriers, trucks, and half-tracks. The British infantry were left powerless. Their 6-pounder gun was ineffective as the behemoth was now running them down. They scattered in a panic as Wittmann rolled past. He then came across the 4th Armoured Recon Company, comprised of 4 Stuarts. Wittmann engaged, knocking out 3 of the Stuarts. He then engaged 2 Cromwells who had been moving to assist, destroying one while the other ran for cover, but he wasn't done. Oh no. It was then he came across the headquarters section and their command tanks. Immediately traversing his gun to face the new threat, both command vehicles were immediately immolated at very close range, before wiping out the headquarters scout car and the units met at half-track. At this point, another Firefly engaged. Realizing he had pushed his luck far enough, Wittmann began to withdraw, traversing his gun rearward to clear his escape route. As he did so, the Cromwell that had earlier ran came into view, hoping to shoot his Tiger's rear. Wittmann's gunner didn't even need the order. That Cromwell too was obliterated at close range. After the carnage was complete, he retreated out of town where the 6-pounder AT gun crew had gotten their shit together, and finally disabled the monster that had just routed their entire force.
And then Wittmann ran like a bitch. Yeah, I remember our video with Pig. Yeah, Wittmann's absolutely slaughtered these guys with his Tiger, but then he ran like a little bitch. 'Cause he was one.
And his crew abandoned their Tiger, escaping on foot to their comrades now rolling down the street.
And they'd lost the Tiger.
By the end of the action,
that couldn't be
his
replaced.
tally stood at 11 tanks, 2 anti-tank guns, and 13 transport vehicles for the loss of 1 Tiger. The Panzer Lehr and the 100...
Maybe, but there's about 50,000 more Shermans on their way, and they're coming to get you.
1st SS Heavy Panzer Regiment continued to attack after Wittmann's daring charge, but the British had reorganised by that stage. Fighting was rather intense as the Tigers split up independently to flank and engage. The Panzer Grenadiers, meanwhile, assaulted the town itself, fighting house to house. The British, realising they were outmatched, began to conduct a fighting retreat. The Germans followed close, keeping up the pressure. However, upon forcing the British out of town, they ran into their prepared positions and reinforcing elements, and then the Germans were forced back. And so, after this ferocious battle, it remained status quo ante. The British lost 27 tanks and a large convoy worth of vehicles. The Germans had lost 15 tanks, 6 of them Tigers. However, as the Germans retained the field, they could recover the ones they had just lost due to tracking or engine damage. But in keeping with the theme, this action was more noticeable precisely because of its rarity. Later during the fighting around Caen, Michael Wittmann was killed. And once the British finally broke through, the backs of the Panzer formations were broken. Combine that with Omar Bradley kicking in the door and launching Operation Cobra, paving the way for Patton's legendary drive at the head of Third Army, the Germans were thrown out of France, finally being trapped and almost completely destroyed in the Falaise pocket. But even after all this, they still had some fight left. The Allies soon reached the edge of their supply lines and came to a halt. Given this reprieve, the Germans reorganised and formed ranks. They were going to make the Allies pay for every inch, which was just as well, because at that precise moment on the Eastern Front, things went to shit.
Again.
In the greatest bait and switch in military history, in my opinion anyway, the Soviets had convinced the Axis of mild disappointment, Romania, Hungary and Germany, that they were actually going for the Ukraine during their summer offensive, and thus drew all of the Eastern Front's reserves to the south. When this happened, the Soviets then launched a surprise offensive out of the Kursk salient at the Northern Front, encircling and destroying the entirety of Army Group Center, while cutting off half of Army Group North, lifting the siege of Leningrad. Seeing the Soviets literally charging towards Central Europe, the Western Allies needed a plan to invade Germany, and they needed it quickly. What they came up with was enthusiastically ambitious.
It's raining men.
Monty!
It's raining men. Amen.
The Tiger played a crucial role in Operation Market Garden, as we know. The operation itself puts the plans of the Japanese Navy to shame in terms of complexity. A huge airborne deployment across most of Holland, followed by a single axis of advance down one road, and every moving part has to succeed in sequence. The British 1st Airborne landed on what remained of the SS Panzer units that had fought in France, while the other airborne units had encountered German reserve units far in excess of what was expected. In what would be the final German victory of the war, the Battle of Arnhem was one of heroic resistance by British and Polish paratroopers. Resistance which, due to poor planning, rushed logistics and the sheer arrogance of its chief architect, and at the front of the advance to crush their final stand around the town of Oosterbeek were the Tigers of 2nd SS Panzer Corps. Although it was not easy for them, as demonstrated by the actions of Victoria Cross winner Robert Kane, who disabled several Tigers himself with a Piat and some cheerful British optimism, combined with seething combat-induced rage.
I bet.
But without 30 Corps armour to reinforce them, the paratroopers were doomed to their fate. Operation Market Garden failed, and the surviving Allied units retreated to rest up for the winter.
And
Next
trap
year
my
was gonna be
grandpa
tough.
at Bastogne.
But at least they'll have Christmas off. Right?
No! Oh, not Mariah Carey. I thought he escaped her! I thought she was refrozen!
Then it came. The final curtain. The closing act, which yet again created another bulge. Ooh.
Shut up!
You would think that, considering it's exactly what they did last time, the Allies would have put
stop
some extra
picking on the
guards or
furries.
some
We're an
reserves
easy
in the
target.
Ardennes, you know? Just in case. But they, again, thought that no one was going to try something that stupid, let alone for the second time, and especially without control of the air. However, they forgot to consider that if it's snowing and planes can't fly, the enemy only has to control the ground. Which, with the new heavy weapons, they very well could. Once more, the Tiger would see battle, but this time it was its successor, the Tiger II, which stole the limelight. Nevertheless, throughout the Battle of the Bulge, the Tiger I did its duty. However, by now the Allies had fielded a large number of upgunned vehicles, such as the Sherman Firefly,
Yep.
the M18 Hellcat,
Yep.
the M36 Jackson,
Yep.
the Comet, and
Oh,
the
yeah.
Pershing. And when General Patton's Third Army counterattacked, it spelled the final doom of the SS 2nd Panzer Corps.
Good.
The German offensive to take Antwerp and split the Allies failed. The 101st Airborne Division held their ground on the main supply route at Bastogne, impairing the resupply and reinforcement of the German advance. Their plan,
Grandpa.
as well as their request for surrender, was eloquently and appropriately defined by the men of the 101st. And it was done with a single word.
Nuts.
Nuts. Meanwhile, on the Ostfront, the Soviets had upgraded their T-34s with 85mm guns, as the IS-2s and ISU-152s began making their presences felt. In fact, they had been known as beast killers, because of their ability to destroy German heavy tanks. The retreat into Poland and East Prussia was defined by the burning tanks and ruined buildings, as the Soviets had to pay for every inch of ground against a determined, and by this stage, desperate defense. At the Battle of the Hochwald Gap in the west, the Canadians were mauled by Tigers dug in on the high ground, while the Americans struggled in clearing the Hurtgen forest. World War II in Europe was coming to a close, and yet the Tiger fought on and on and on. On April 11th, 1945, a Tiger ambushed a column of Shermans, destroying 3 tanks along with an M8 scout car. While up north in the British sector the very next day, another Tiger destroyed a pair of Comet tanks, a scout car, and a half-track.
Stefan, just for your advice, basically he was so nuts was basically just the basic term that they eventually agreed on. According to my grandfather when he was still alive, he once said that basically they really said was go fuck yourself. Basically, nuts back then was their basic term of relating to the Germans to go fuck themselves. That's what nuts really represented. basically, my grandfather went along like this. He's like, so the commanding officer gets the German offer to surrender. Well, so basically the Germans show up and they're like, please surrender, we have you surrounded. The American 101st Commander looks at the guy and says, go fuck yourself. The guy who has to relay that message to the German command says, I don't know how to put that down in orders. Just say nuts. That's basically what happened. Go fuck yourself just turned into nuts. That's basically it.
Before being destroyed by a third comet. But the last action of the Tiger, the very last action, came in the burning embers of Berlin.
Oh, yeah.
During the Soviet advance towards the Reichstag and the Brandenburg Gate, they had to cross the famous Berlin Tiergarten, now reduced to barren trees and churned earth. And standing in their way was the last Tiger of Panzerabteilung Müncheberg. After fighting ferociously with the oncoming attackers over the past week since the Battle of the Salo Heights, the crew expended the last of their munitions. Being out of fuel and out of ammo, they were forced to abandon the tank, fighting on foot in the defense of the Reichstag, leaving their vehicle to the Soviets while they made their desperate last stand. The date was April 30th, 1945. That night, Soviet troops raised their flag over Berlin and its most famous building. And it's this day
Why am I hearing
our story ends. Because as the last Tiger stood in the shadow of Berlin's greatest landmarks, the man ultimately responsible for its creation finally accomplished what assassins and air raids had failed to do in 15 years. And despite the evil regime the Tiger served, its contributions to the history of armored warfare cannot be understated.
Absolutely.
And like her monstrous master, it cannot be denied that she went down swinging.
Bullshit! The bitch shot himself! Why are we hearing the country? He didn't. He broke like a bitch and died. And that ends that. Oh, Anarchy, I am not liking how you went after us furries. I get it, there's a few of us that are shitheads. I fully agree to that, but there's shitheads in every fandom. Do I need to talk about the Vaboos? I need to go lay down. I need to go find my dog and lay down. I need to go make the pain go away. I thought I already did. Anyway. Well, in the end, it all came down to a vote, and next time we'll do Manstead. Next time we'll do Marseille. Fuck. I need to go. I'm gonna go lay down and forget the pain. I'm gonna go forget the pain, and if I see any fucking memes, Nate! I don't know what the fuck I'm gonna do, so thank you all for watching, and as always, you know who I am, I know who you are. And I'll see you guys all hopefully in the next video. Fucking A.